Today's leaders must be more than just decision makers or visionaries in our group. They must be what we call resilient digital collaborators, capable of navigating complex digital ecosystems while fostering human connections in an increasingly virtual world with the most diverse and multi-generational workforce we've ever seen. Our research shows that more than 80% of organizations recognize the need for major changes to their leadership development approaches, and so we thought it would be a great topic to start with. So we've assembled a stellar panel from diverse organizations and industries: BMW, Bank of America, L'Oreal, PepsiCo, and Tata Consultancy Services, to explore how to develop future-ready leaders for this multi-generational, hyper-connected world. We could have no better person to moderate the discussion than our own Chief Strategy Officer, Michael Rochelle. So please welcome Michael and the panel to the stage.
First, I always want to congratulate everyone here for the great things that you've done, the awards that you've won, so give yourself a round of applause. It's one of those rare times where you can say I'm perfect. Tomorrow, maybe not, but for the next couple of days, you're absolutely perfect, and that's why you're here. What we plan on talking about this morning, we think is an important topic. You know, tomorrow's session with Mike and his team will be talking about AI and how that's transforming the workplace. But we wanted to talk about what's happening in the organizational setting when it comes to the multi-generational workforce. You know, it's one of the most extraordinary times, both for recruiting talent and retaining talent across as many as 4 or 5 different generations. And as we start to work through that, some of you might already be seeing that much more than others. Larger penetration of the younger generation being in the workforce. Some of you are getting ready for it. But we can all agree that it's inevitable. And let's face it, you know, they're different. They're different from the perspective is that they have different dreams, aspirations, milestones, what they expect of themselves, how they align very closely to the brand of the organization with their personal brand. They're digital natives, not a digital immigrant like me at best. So we have to think about how not only do we help them to shape their career development and personal development, but we all know in our hearts that they're going to be our future leaders within the organization as well. And so we thought we'd bring this team of experts together and talk about things in 3 perspectives. One is the individual themselves, just talking about the generations as individuals. What are their expectations? How do we need to connect with them? What are their needs and requirements are? How do we create close collaboration with them? Help them to be able to understand what we know and what they know and bridge that and have a handshake on that value proposition. We're then going to transition into, as leaders within an organization, what are our responsibilities? What are our accountabilities to these generations? How do we help them? How do we not make them feel like, you know, I'm the newbie and I don't know anything, or you remind me of my oldest son, and all the things that we love to do, right? It's really nice to be able to hire your kids, right? And we want to kind of get away from that and start to say that these are people that are the most educated people have ever entered the workforce, and they have the greatest level of aspiration for what they want to do. Many of them think that they could probably run the company by next Tuesday, and maybe they could. Seems like you'll find here, like for Tata, for example, they have 600,000 employees, and the average age is 28. So this is something that we want to make sure that we're inclusive in our thoughts. So we'll talk as leaders about what our responsibilities are. And then finally, the tough nut to crack is, what responsibilities does our organization have? What are the cultural principles that we need to have in place? What are the underpinnings, the foundation of making all generations within our workforce comfortable, that they feel like they belong, they feel like they're included, their opinion is valid even though they may be newer and don't have as much tenure as others? And what's the bright future for them? So how do we foster like a continuous learning organization, lifelong learning? How do we put employee value proposition engagement first? What type of work setting do we set up? Believe it or not, we're going to have a conversation about technology becomes more important than ever. The technology they interact with, modern look and feel, is a direct reflection on the company itself. No one wants to be like super cool outside of work, walk across the parking lot, come into the organization. It's the dark ages. Like, here's your pitchfork and here's your torch, and good luck, and you should probably gnaw off your left arm before I use the LMS, right? So we got to talk about tech, because all of these things now are important. What we want you to take away from this conversation is we wanted to create dialogue for the rest of the time you're here. We want you to be able to talk up, like, how are you addressing all of this? You may not agree with everything we say. You may say it's slightly impossible. But what we want to do is we have to have this conversation. And this is our time the next few days to get together, all these great award winners, all these great ideas, to kind of address this so that we're prepared for what's going to be the most extraordinary change in the workforce. So with that, I'm going to take a seat and we'll get started. So I'm going to just allow each one of the panelists to run through really quickly who they are and what they do at their organizations, a little bit about their organization, so it'll give you a little bit more context. So we'll start, Nicki.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nicki Creech. I am with BMW Manufacturing and responsible for leadership, team, and professional development.
Brad?
Yeah. I'm Brad Jane. I work at PepsiCo, and I work on our senior executive talent team within our global management center of excellence. I mostly focus on senior leader assessment, sort of at the SVP plus level within our organization, and then development strategy for that as well.
Good morning. Excuse me. Bernard Hampton at Bank of America. As the head of the Academy, that's our Chief Learning Officer organization. And so in doing so, I lead our enterprise-wide onboarding, education, and professional development organization for the company.
Rebecca?
I'm Rebecca, similar role, head of learning, people development and learning for L'Oreal. You probably are familiar with our flagship brand, L'Oreal Paris, but what a lot of people don't know is we own over 40 different brands. So Maybelline, Garnier, Redken, Kiehl's, there's a whole portfolio of brands that we're managing here.
Ashok?
Hi, I'm Ashok Seetharaman. I head HR for TCS US. My job is to attract, retain, and grow careers of a lot of fantastic people that we have.
All right, let's get into it. So let's just talk about the individual. When we were reflecting on the conversations that we had preparing for the discussion, one thing we talked about was the uniqueness of like the needs, the wants, desires, aspirations. How are we connecting on that? Like in your organizational settings, like how are you making sure that you understand that with the generations that are now entering the workforce? So anyone who wants to jump in and get us started.
Well, we get to do it in a lot of ways, actually. And so what I'm pleased about is we see that as an exciting moment. I think you listen to a lot of companies and you can hear individual players within companies think about what you made a joke about, in the beginning, they want to be CEO tomorrow, that kind of thing. And all of us probably work in companies where there's at least 3 generations, if not 4, for the majority of us, right? And I always remind people to think about how you watched your first movie and how about everybody across your company. And the millennials are just as different. The boomers, if you will, thought about longevity and job security, and the millennials think about, I want things to be different. But they also have great work ethics, because they'll think about multiple jobs or gig economy. And so it isn't the rush. I see it as they think about learning. And so our opportunity to embrace them is in the way that we engage, communicate, differentiate, and have an inclusive culture within the company that embraces the spirit that they bring. And for leaders to look at them as, what might these folks teach somebody on my team differently than someone else? And then how might somebody that comes from a different generation might equally bring value to them along the way? And then they all contribute to the culture. They all contribute to the way that we build our learning platforms.
I was going to say, if you don't mind,
Sure.
I think every person brings something different to the table. And if we don't ask them questions and be openly curious to what the answer is, we really miss out on any other opportunity to maybe connect with them. We talk about the different generations, but if we place them in a box and make assumptions about this is what boomers would want, or this is what Generation X wants, or the millennials or Z, then we're missing the opportunity to connect, make that human connection to find out individually. And it is just as easy as asking questions to find out what is it that they want to get from this career.
Yeah, that's probably a lost art with many of us, is we probably stopped asking the questions that we should ask, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brad?
Yeah, I was going to say, in preparation for this, I was reviewing some of the research on generations in the workplace, and there's a meta-analysis that was published last year, so it's looking across about 140 studies, 150,000 people, looking at like job satisfaction, commitment, turnover intentions, and there actually isn't that many differences when we actually look at the generations, which I think leads to two things. One, building off of what Nicki said, when we stereotype, when we kind of draw a box around them, we make these assumptions and we kind of read all the articles out there that I think really capitalize on what we think about generations just as stereotypes or biases. You can really actually work against yourself. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. The other takeaway is it's mostly driven by individuals, I think. So you need to ask the questions. I think the major takeaway for me is also that the newer generations, or just how we interact with work in general, we want it to be more engaging. Like, we don't want to go to work and just have it be the same clock in, clock out. So I think it's actually a call to action. It's kind of inspiring because we get to do more fun work in a lot of our organizations to try to attract and retain some of the best talent.
You know, that's an interesting point, and before we get the other panelists to weigh in, is it does have to be more engaging. You know, oftentimes when we're working with organizations, we'll say to the learning or talent organization, go on a field trip down the hallway to the marketing department, you know, and realize that now it's a strategy, a communication to attract people back to your organization. We have to sell them every day on why it's a good idea to be here. But Ashley, you had some thoughts too, right?
Yeah. You earlier mentioned we have like 600,000 people, and 85% of them are either Gen Z or, you know, Gen Y, millennials. And, you know, you have another 15% who are, you know, Gen X and so on. So anything that we do right now, you need to ensure that these three generations are, you know, their needs are very different. For instance, if you have to do employee satisfaction survey, the younger generation would do it only on a mobile phone. They don't want to do it in a web-based. So we have to develop something. If you need to engage with this generation, then you need to adapt to them. So as much as you know, the older generations may want to do it in a different way, I think if you don't constantly learn from the newer generation, and you know, even learning that we have, we try to create ways in which that you can engage the newer generation. Like, they would not sit in a whole day classroom to learn. They just need 10-minute nano videos, 15-minute nano videos, and they know it. And the attitude is also, I know it. You just need to, you know.
Of course they do.
And for that generation, we tell them you don't have to sit in a class. If you can do, you know, exit test and you get your competencies, then you're good. You know, we don't have to force them to go through you know, long sessions and so on. So I think that's the importance. You need to know what is the segment, how do you cater to them, and that's the only way you can engage and help them grow.
One thing we did at L'Oreal is we were reading all the external data, but we knew we had to study the organization within. So we started an initiative called All Generations, and we did you know, a very traditional employee listening journey, focus groups, surveys. And you know, originally the obsession was about the new generation coming in and wanting to understand them. But what we sometimes forget is it's all generations. And so what we started to uncover too is the baby boomers, they're craving so much attention and skill building, and they want to leave their legacy. And we weren't doing enough to invest in that generation either. So what we're trying to do now is be very targeted around from the new generations coming in, but also retaining our older generations. What are the customized skill building that they need? How do we get the best out of everybody and make sure that, yeah, it's a very inclusive approach, because it's so easy to get sucked into the new.
And if we're not open to those different perspectives, If we're not willing to listen,
Right.
then it's lost information. I mean, somebody that's brand new to the company is coming in with a completely different perspective than someone that's been there for 30 years. And you know, we really have to switch and see things the way they might see them instead of how we expect them to see them.
Yeah, and it's an interesting bridge back to what Ashok was saying is I know is also a form of communication. You know, just saying you know, like you don't want to go too far and kind of trample on that confidence level because, you know, you want to accept that it's not something where someone is basically saying, you've been here 5 minutes, how could you know? They very well could. And we have to kind of then embrace that. And what Rebecca was talking about too is, it's kind of a balance, isn't it, between identifying and understanding their differences, but not having them drive silos or different approaches and different ways of doing things. I'm going to take this back to Bernard and Brad, what they talked about. Like, how do you make sure that you embrace those differences, but then you kind of smooth it all out? You know, particularly like with learning, like we were discussing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to, people are always watching what you do. And so, did you listen? And at the other end of that, somebody's looking for action. And so when you make training accessible, varied, as Brad said, interesting, engaging, varying modalities, everything's not going to be an in-person learning experience because it needs to be at scale. Sometimes it's video or virtual, sometimes it's VR headsets, or sometimes it's a session in the metaverse. All of these things become intriguing, but the overall center is around how do we help you be successful in your role? And so whether it's the 1,800 interns that start with us every year in June, or the 2,000 full-times that start a month later that were interns 2 years before, it is what we learn from them and what we learn from our existing workforce is, at the end of the day, does a company create opportunity for me? Does it put opportunity and make them accessible? Do I have access to the information, tools, skill development, and is it focused in a way that is democratized, available to me? I don't need a manager to give me access, but I can access it myself. And then I feel in control, I'm empowered. And so we hear that across generations, that if I feel supported, if I'm engaged, if an opportunity exists and I understand the roadmap, I can get there, and then it's more on me versus I can't blame the company for it. I have an engaged responsibility. And then the final thing that I would say is not to ever, as part of the language, is not talking about things and this is the path in definitives. Usually doesn't fit, you know, millennials, Gen Z, and even other generations for that point. People want to know that what's the typical path, right, and then what are my options? Because then ultimately I have a choice to make.
You know, Brad, you brought up the word engagement. I think, Nicki, when we were talking when we first met, you brought up, you know, you need to be curious about that. How do you go about doing that engagement? Like, how do you make sure that what Bernard's talking about others, like, what does that engagement look like? Are we getting out there more often and talking to people? Like, what does your organization do to foster that engagement, not just have it be words, but more action?
Yeah, I think like most organizations, we have like an org health survey. So we do a lot of employee listening. We do that once a year in the fall, but then we also do kind of a follow-up analysis with smaller cohorts to get a representative sample. One of the things I think, Bernard, what you were talking about is that flexibility, I think. One of the things some organizations do, I think we put millions of dollars into our talent acquisition. We're getting really good talent. We're kind of advertising our employer value proposition, and then people enter the workforce and it's just this structured, you know, maybe not the most overhauled kind of experience for learning and development. So one of the things PepsiCo does is try to do a lot of flexible opportunities where people get to come in either through like a designate program where we know they're really good, but we're not sure where to put them. So we kind of place them around in different roles, let them learn the organization, and then we engage with them to get feedback on how things can change. So you're training them before you have maybe the job ready. Or we do these rotational programs, which I think are big in a lot of organizations, where people get that varied experience before landing in a role that we know we have for them. So there's a variety of ways. I think what happens is you engage these people at the very beginning. You pull the rug out from under them because they go in a role that maybe isn't what they thought it was. But if you provide them this opportunity to see the organization, maybe through a rotational program or through a more engaging onboarding process where we really give it to them up front versus you've got to earn it or kind of sit and roll for 9 months, you can start getting better feedback and you can pull that engagement through by creating that commitment up front.
So one of the things I'd like to add to that, because I think that you mentioned some really great points, it's very different mentorship or experiences or time in role. One of the things that has been done in the past is these are the classes you need to take. And check the box, I went to this class, now I'm ready to be a leader. And when we start having more discussions about what it is you're doing as a leader, and are you able to do that in the flow of work at high stressful times, now you've kind of arrived and closed that skill gap. So we have an assessment of skills where it's in person and they come and there's a role play. Everybody hates role play, but you say role play to somebody on a manufacturing floor, they think it's 2 4-letter words. But the thing is that without putting them in that scenario, how are we supposed to know what somebody will behave like? And somebody may not pass the assessment because what they viewed their leader as doing is what they themselves did, and realize that no, you can't pound your fist on the table and demand somebody to work if it's not mandatory. So let's talk about what we need to see from you in order to earn that frontline supervisor position. Because especially in a deskless workforce, as we see, it's more difficult to say, here you are exposed to training. Here you are, there's something online that you can take, because they don't have computers to be able to do that. They need more simulations in the flow of work for understanding what it is that they have to be doing or the actions or behavior that they show to be able to earn those opportunities.
It's a great point. And Rebecca, just to follow up on something, when you're approaching what you're approaching on this kind of career pathing, how do you think organizations are starting to understand better that learning is one of the most powerful retention tools in and of itself? It's not just for the purposes of getting someone to know more, but the process itself could hold on to great employees or lose them just as quickly, in particular with the younger generation. So what's your thoughts around that?
I think there's been a huge, oh, sorry.
Oh, you both.
Yeah, okay. See, I think what we've done is democratized learning. Earlier, somebody had to go through a set pattern. If you are in a junior grade, then you have to, you had certain levels you had to grow. You were in a middle level. So now we've sort of opened it up, and we call this elevate. And you have wings 1, 2, 3 are the internal nomenclatures that we use. So if people can aspire to become whatever you learn, they get rewarded based on that. They get a 30% hike or so, something. I'm just giving you for learning. So you not only helping them realize their potential, their career aspiration, but you're also getting them rewarded and you retain them. So I think that's something that we've tried and we see it extremely successful. Because if there are people who aspire to grow in, say, a leadership stream, then they can go get certified, do their learning, and they can grow in a leadership. Or if somebody is interested in marketing, sales, HR, you can go across streams. You don't necessarily need to go only in a technology stream and so on. So I think that's something that we believed has worked very well for us. And learning has to be lifelong. And what we've seen in the last 2-3 days, one technology can go and another one can come, all in like no time, right? So you not only invest in what's today's technology, or you have to constantly be looking at how are you looking at the next thing, both as an organization as well as an individual. If you need to be relevant, doesn't matter TCS, I think anybody in this industry. That's what, if you have to stay relevant, you got to learn. And I think that's how you sort of, help them do that.
Rebecca?
I think there's been a really steady shift in the learning landscape over the past few decades, but I think it's accelerating. And it's probably because of the rapid shifts in technology and AI, and we all see all the research now, 85%, 70%, depends on the study, right, of jobs are going to change or be impacted as a result of AI. And my favorite quote right now, and I'm sure many of you have heard it, is you don't need to be afraid that AI is going to take your job. It's somebody who knows how to use AI will take your job. And that, to me, puts learning at the center, because it becomes a skills economy where you have to be developing skills at a faster pace than we ever have before. And the newer generations know this, and the modern companies are keeping pace, and they're really investing in learning. And you can see our C-suite executives, they understand that, and they know that this is where we need to be investing to prepare the workforce for the future.
Mike, I love your question about the power of career pathing and are people paying attention, always is the question, right? I'll share a couple of data points. So we built a career path tool that exists that will show somebody a path if I want to remain an individual producer or if I want to be a leader. Will they use it? The second thing we built is our talent organization did an assessment for what were the most dominant skills across the organization, whether they were functional skills, data skills, leadership skills. There's 200 of them. And so my team produced a professional skills library of some 200 skills. So that went out in 2024. Last year, 54,000 people, or a company of 213,000, 54,000 people went out and accessed the career tool one or multiple times during the year. 116,000 went out and accessed and took one or more professional skills during the course of the year. So it just so happened those two things are out there. It's available to me. I can navigate a path. The tool will tell me not only about the role, but what are the skills required. And oh, here's a link to, here's a way for me to control my own development. And it's not manager directed, it's all self-paced, but that's pretty high usage in year one for people to think about.
Tremendous.
I can control this myself.
Very similar for us too, same thing, built a skills library, mapped it to all the jobs in the organization, and the consumption is very fast. Like the employees are very curious about the skills that they need, not only for the job that they're mapped to today, but I think more so it's, ooh, that's the job that I want, what are the skills that I need, what are the skills I have, and it becomes more clear on the path to get there.
Yeah,
Good point.
that's interesting. I was going to say, I think if I reflect on it, I think PepsiCo might be a little behind the ball in terms of where we think about with people changing jobs, maybe laterally instead of up. I think one of the things I realized when I joined PepsiCo is we're so strong in leadership assessment and development that most people see their career up and not across. And one of the things our new CHRO is trying to do is rethink what being a talent academy company means, in terms of you don't have to go up every, I think our average is like 18 to 24 months. Yet you don't have to think about that as your high potential program, but maybe going laterally and learning other skills is better. I feel like we're a little sluggish in adopting that actual ideology because people are so dead set on upward advancement so quickly. And so we're having to unravel a bit of that kind of culture of if I'm high-po, I'm moving up. But I think one of the things we probably need to do, we're doing work on the skills front, but one of the other things that shows up in our org health results all the time is that people don't understand their career path. They don't understand what's available to them. We also don't have enough cross-pollination of leaders across areas in recognition of what their opportunities are from a career perspective. So I was coaching somebody who's in our, kind of like our ESG group, and from my perspective, I see so many opportunities for that person to utilize their skills in another area of the company, and yet it's so hard to open those doors for them, and they don't see it themselves.
Right.
So it's just trying to build that capability where they understand that they're valued and that they can do other things within the company, because otherwise they just look external.
That's a great point, and that's something that BMW has done for a long time. Is every career path is about jumping to different areas. We have manufacturing, we have after sales. Even in manufacturing, you have a finance group, you have a production group, you have a body shop, you have a paint shop, you have logistics. Well, if someone is going to be promoted into leadership, it's not because they stayed in the same place. It's because they were just as valuable in that one department as they were in another department because of what skills they were able to bring that weren't just technical in nature and knowledge in nature for that area. So being cross-functional, being a leader isn't about the title you have, it's about what you're bringing to the table to better the business. And so you're valued and given opportunities for promotion or leadership after you've already taken the opportunity to be a project manager in a completely different environment than where you may have had most of your career.
Right. So let's talk about the role of leadership in all of this. What responsibilities, what accountability do we have as leaders within our organization to help to bridge these generational differences, gaps, opportunities? And the other piece with that too is when we talk about leaders, do we feel leaders understand that they have to build the bridge out? Or are we too expectant to have people say, hey, it's my organization, you've arrived, like you tell me? What do leaders really need to do in order to make this all happen, what we've been talking about for the individual?
See, in TCS, every CEO of the company has come from within. We've had 4 CEOs so far in a 50-year history. All of them have come from within. So, every time we go to a school to hire somebody, and all of them have come to, join TCS from ground up. They've joined as, fresh out of college. They've grown their careers in TCS. So we always say, TCS, we give you a career. It's not a job. And sometimes when you go to a campus, school, college, we tell them, for all you know, we are hiring the next CEO of the company. So in that background, I think every, leader, we have mentoring as a very, very strong platform tool to help, navigate careers of the next gen. And they not only, mentor them, there's also reverse mentoring, because you need to learn some of the newer ways of doing things. You have to keep yourself abreast of the newer ways of engaging with them. And so mentoring has worked very well for us. And, I think coaching is another thing that we believe is important. And we've created enough tools. As much as we are a tech company, we believe high tech, high touch is important. So you create tools, and then, people, we have a thing called Know Me. So you can create ERGs like what Brad was mentioning, you create groups. So if somebody aspires in someone's leadership qualities and so on, he can create a group, he can mentor people, he can coach them, he can take them on. So I believe mentoring is something very important, and you got to live, what you say, you got to walk the talk as a leader as well. It's only then people will take credibility in what you do, what you say, and so on. So.
I think you have to understand it and enable it. And when we're at our best, we have a theme of one company, many careers. And I think leaders sometimes can have a tendency or propensity to want to hang on to talent, but when you appreciate the fact that we may be a company of 8 different lines of business, 6 different support organizations, at the end of the day, there's still one stock price. And so we don't do well unless we deliver for the whole company. And so we do it by the way we train leaders, and we certainly do it by also how we communicate the success stories. When we tell stories of people like a young lady named Yamilet, who in her 15th year with the company is in her 8th career. That was her part-time job while she was in college, and she grew up and became a manager, and she went into a support organization. She came into the academy at some point and expanded her skills and contributed what she was passionate about. She went back into the business at a higher level role. She became an executive. She ran the state of North Carolina at one point. She went into lending, she went into client experience, and now she's the performance executive for our mortgage organization. Mm-hmm. And it was just the story of all of these careers because of using the tools that were available, and for a company that understood her and pushed her to her potential, but not past the border.
Right. Yeah, tools is big. Brad?
You just made me think of, there's a couple executives that I've coached where they started when they were like 18. You know, they just finished high school. They're, you know, in their 50s now, and they're a little self-conscious that they don't have a college degree. But they started at like our absolute lowest position, and they go on to be so successful. So you just made me think of that. But the one thing I was going to say, I think our leadership just needs to maintain flexibility and openness in a lot of ways. I think when you get stuck thinking about talent in a particular way, so, or like a career being just like one way highway, that's when you lose some of the best people. And one point I've been thinking a little bit about recently is that a lot of times at PepsiCo, we have people who stay 25, 30 years, you know, they bleed blue in a lot of ways. They move around to different regions and get all these diverse experiences. Not everybody can have that. And I think they're excited about opportunities external. And if you look at some of our senior leaders or middle management, some of the people who have boomeranged, who come back, are really successful. They go learn something at another organization, they come back, we hire them into a higher level role. Maybe there's a blocker, you know, that keeps them from getting that experience, but they can go external to get that. And so even maintaining flexibility in the way that you think about, well, if somebody leaves, they're dead to us, okay? That's like one way to think about it. Okay, maybe if they leave twice, dead, you know? But it might even be cheaper to recruit them. They've gone to learn these skills. They recognize what they love about your company, so they're even more committed when they come back. So even that level of flexibility, I think, is helpful, just to think about some differences in the way to do things. I think when you disregard somebody asking for more flexibility, either in the skills that they want to gain or the ways that you do things in your job, if you disregard that and kind of shut that door, that can be one of like the biggest levers of org commitment just turning right off, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Nicki, you brought up something when we were preparing for this discussion, is resist people putting people in a box. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that. What does that mean from a leader perspective?
Being open. I think open means a lot of different things, but in the stress of work, of producing, of helping the business achieve its goals, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that it's the people doing the work. And none of us want to be thought of as just being in a box ourselves. I use this terminology a lot because we do a lot with DISC. And so as I happen to be a DISC style that some people look at as being dominant or argumentative, I want to say, but I'm really a nice person, right? Don't put me in a box. We have a tendency to be lazy ourselves and want to think about people just like that. And as a leader, when they're so focused on a business goal or achieving their own objectives, they forget sometimes that it's the people doing the work. And if they're not willing to see them outside of whatever box, whatever their label is as far as their role in the organization, then we miss out on that opportunity to see what else they could do. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that we talk about leading from where you are, not in the actual role. When interns come in, and you mentioned this with interns, they tend to think of themselves as, they put themselves in a box. Well, I'm just an intern. They don't want to hear what I say. I haven't been here as long as they have, or I don't have as much experience. And the first message that we always give them is, no, you're valuable here. I need your insight. You see things that I stopped seeing a long time ago, and I need someone to point that out to me. So I want to hear from you. If our leaders aren't approaching their people with that same kind of openness to hear from them, to accept feedback that they may not like to hear themselves, we're missing out on an opportunity to go right back to what Claude mentioned at the very beginning, and that is human connection. People want to be heard.
Right.
Sometimes you can't go down the road that they want you to go to, but did you at least listen to what they had to say before you cut them off?
Right. Rebecca, you were nodding and smiling.
Yeah. So, I think on the leadership development, this has been like a big investment of L'Oreal over the past few years, because honestly, for a while, I think it was sort of seen as HR's job. Like, have to give difficult feedback, HR will do it. Have to recruit, hire, it was very much put on the HR function. And so we made a very intentional effort, and it's a bit hokey, honestly, but we created this thing called the magic triangle, where we talk about you've got the employee, you've got the HR partner, and the manager. But we started to get really prescriptive around each one of those roles in every scenario, from recruitment, interns, onboarding, all of it. And we're always coming back to it, and we're talking about what are you responsible for as the individual, as the employee, because sometimes we forget there's a real accountability and a role to play there. Where does the manager come in as a coach, as a people developer? How do we reward those behaviors? You know, of course, we built it into bonuses. We put leadership surveys in place, so we're getting data and there's some accountability. And then being much more intentional about the role of HR. And we put a series of programs in place where we really, because it's a large organization, it's 90,000 globally, 13,000 in the US. So just in the US alone, we have 3,000 people managers. So that's a difficult number to train in like a really intimate way. But we started to look at how can we have this sort of ripple effect where we take first the top 20 leaders. We really get them thinking deeply about the year ahead, how we need to develop our talent, et cetera. And then we pull together in the first quarter the top 200 leaders in what we call a leadership exchange. But this is the moment where we really engage that population of very senior, important, influential leaders. If you think about it, they have responsibility then for the rest of the organization. And that's where we set the tone for the expectation for people leaders, the culture, what's happening. And from there, then, we engage the next 3,000. And it's really helped us to be more intentional and have a systematic approach versus before we were just hoping we could take 20 people, put them in a classroom, hopefully they would come out a little bit changed, and then we'll take another 20. And it wasn't sticking. And so by being in it all together, all learning the same language at the same time, we're on year 3, and I would say we do see massive shifts in engagement, in enablement, in turnover. I mean, I think it has been a successful approach, but it requires so much intentionality, and that HR is not there to do it all. We drive it, but with very intentional support from our leaders.
Yeah, I think the last thought before we open up to questions, I'm going to come back to something that Bernard touched on in our preparation and Ashok brought up, is this term democratization. Mm-hmm. It's a very cool term that we talked up. And I thought, Bernard, maybe you could kick it off now we're talking at an organizational level. You know, how do we democratize our organization to adjust and to adapt to all of this?
Yeah, the first thing I think about is how does all of HR work together? And so I think HR gets this blanket statement, but within GHR for us is somebody that owns the head of comp and benefits, somebody's the head of talent, my role is the head of the academy, head of D&I, head of governance, head of employee relations. And it is all of the actions that we take thinking about all of our people working together. And while any of us could operate in a vacuum, we have this culture that none of us will be as good as we can be, or our remits or responsibilities, unless others have a voice or the opportunity to weigh in, because any one of us could also throw the culture of the organization out of kilter. And so that flows down into ultimately what we produce. And we always think first about the employee. What do they need? Where do they find it? Is it easy for them to find? Would they agree in their feedback that it matters for them, that it's conducive, whether they use it in that moment or not, but is it conducive? Does it support what their career goals and objectives are? And then as much as possible, be available for managers to be able to coach, direct, tap into when they're working on performance development plan discussions, but also accessible for the associate to be able to show their own self-drive and be able to access on their own. And so our ability to tell the stories, not just from, sometimes we do it on video for employees. I don't like them to be in just one modality of just an email or newsletter. I want video, I want short videos, I want interviews on stage, because you get to hear from managers, you hear from employees telling the story of the tools that they use and ascend it to their career, especially those unlikely paths. And a lot of times the employee themselves is the best advocate for another colleague, hearing the story from them directly.
Ashok?
See, I think what we've done is we've created a talent marketplace, you know. So any roles that we have in the organization across the globe are posted there. Just for instance, in my 29 years in the company, I've done 10 different jobs within the company. So I think it's one, by culture. The second is now, how do you enable it for a global workforce? How do you make it open for anybody to aspire to get? Otherwise, like you said, right, I mean, there could be a manager, and if he has a great talent, he would want to keep him with him. And if you don't take care of that person's aspiration, he may look out. So we've created a talent marketplace. So all jobs within the organization, at any point in time, there are like 40, 50,000 jobs that are there across the globe. They're available for people. Anybody can aspire to, you know, do a particular role. They will be evaluated for the job. And if they're selected, of course, you have to look at what is the, you know, logical time in which he can be moved to that next aspiring role, and we make it happen. So I think that's something that we believe is very key. Otherwise, they're going to, you know, make their own decisions. So might as well give them within the organization.
Okay, let's open it up to questions from you. You've heard a lot from the experts, a lot of great dialogue. What questions does the audience have?
Hi, my name is Sanjeev. I'm coming from India. And I have a question for all of you, maybe in one or two lines. How do you know that you're doing an excellent job in developing future leaders in case of multi-generational workforce? What are the matrices for you in each of the organization or respective organizations?
I mean, I don't want to say myself, you know, I'm doing a great job in HR, that whatever it is. But having said that, to answer your question, the fact that all our CEOs have come from within the company, or every leadership position that we have, 9 out of 10, we are able to create leaders from within the organization. We have our own leadership academy. And for every role, including my role, I have a named a deputy, a successor, whom we, you know, identify, get them to start working with us, coach. I think that's important. Like I talked about, mentoring, coaching is very key. And if you do that, I'm sure you will be able to take care of your leadership stream in the future.
I think the ultimate measure is business performance. At the end of the day, if we're doing a good job in HR, then we're growing the business. But of course, there's other measures as well. One of my favorites is Net Promoter Score, and it's asking our team members, how likely would you be to recommend L'Oreal to a friend or family? And that's a tricky question to ask, because you get some nuanced responses. But it's one of the clearest measures of whether or not you're going to tell your sister-in-law, your neighbor, your friend at the bar to come and join you or not. And I think that's a good indicator of the health of your culture.
And it's anecdotal, I think. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. No,
you
go
mind?
ahead.
You know, I think that the greatest measure is when you actually see people who are doing something different as a result, based upon your own actions. I had a story one time. Nothing is probably more uncomfortable than telling a bunch of manufacturing people that we're going to bring them in and talk about emotional intelligence, right? Yeah, that didn't make me very popular. I had to call it
Not to make a
EQ.
sweeping generalization, but
But then I was out on the floor shadowing somebody, and I overheard a frontline supervisor pull another frontline supervisor off to the side, and he's like, dude, have you taken iLead yet? And that's our program. And he's like, no, why? He said, because your amygdala really went off. You should not have been yelling at that guy. And I'm overhearing this. I'm like, oh my gosh, it stuck. This is amazing. And those are those gold moments that you realize you're
Right.
on the right path. You know, of course it's the business, but
Right.
when those things happen, you realize you're making an impact.
Bernardi, I thought.
Yeah, in addition to the two Rebecca said, which I completely agree with, we'll look at a couple of other things. The depth of our succession plans, and are they able to be filled internally? And then second, I think about the number of promotions last year, 15,000 and change. Obviously, those, for the most part, came out of roles that have to be replaced, but when you look at our external hires, it was just over 17,000. So it's think about all of those roles were able to be filled internally because they were ready now teammates based on the skills that they were able to develop working with their leaders or on their own.
Any other questions? There are more questions. Got one down here, over here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm just curious if the way that you identify leadership potential changes with each generation, or if it's consistent across all the employees.
I'm going to let Brad jump in on that one.
Yeah, PepsiCo's got a massive program of assessment centers. I think we have 4. We might be building a 5th that goes all the way down to about manager, senior associate. So those not familiar, an assessment center works off of our leadership model, and we have multiple assessments like personality tests and reasoning tests and simulations and all these sorts of things that go into it. That's how we measure potential. I think when you think about it from like a generational perspective, I don't think the overall methodology has to change. I think as long as your fundamentals are strong, your assessments are strong, and ideally you're investing in them over time to revamp them and make them relevant, ideally about your culture, the challenges your business is facing, either globally or within whatever nationality it is, I think that's going to get you there. I think potential as a construct isn't going to change, right? It's leadership potential to make an impact, maybe within a certain time frame or time horizon for their career. That's not going to change. The problems might change that they're going to go after, but potential's not going to change. Yeah.
Interesting perspective.
The one thing that I might add, for especially amongst the younger generation, although not to put them in a box, what do their peers say about them? Because you do have a lot of leaders' opinion to provide people with the opportunities, but what are their peers willing to follow them? Because how somebody behaves and acts amongst their own peers may be very different than how other people may see that. So without that as an input, I think you might be missing out on their ability to influence as a leader.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on the last question too. That I think transparency is really key when you're talking about like leadership pipeline or potential. I used to work at PwC doing employee listening consulting, and it's interesting how many companies ask the right questions, but then they aren't transparent about the results for certain things. And so you want your leaders to feel like they can be transparent about how people feel about their careers, either on the team or within the organization, so you can have those conversations, especially if you're already asking the questions. Might as well talk about it, right? So not just doing lip service to employee listening, but really trying to understand what it means for people in their careers.
Who needs an AI assistant? You could just have the 5 of them in your building every day, and you just kind of go ask them everything. So, do we have another question?
Hi, my name is Jivko Kirov. I lead sales enablement for Hewlett-Packard. My question is, I feel like we have a real attention deficit disorder across the world. We can't put the whole human population on Adderall, right? But you know, if you think about what we're competing with, right? We are competing basically with very smart, engaging, algorithm-driven ways of capturing people's attention. And we as corporate learning leaders are competing with that. It's a real war for human attention going on. So how do you deal with that? I guess that's my question. And do you feel, connected question, do you feel that learning technology gives us what we need to compete?
How many of you have been in a meeting or a learning program and somebody's multitasking on their phone? And I read a stat earlier that 2.5% of us are actually effective multitaskers. And I completely believe it, because the other stat I was reading is, I was telling Nicki before, on an average day, Americans consume 74 gigabytes of information, which is equivalent to 16 movies. So you just think about how much data we're consuming every moment of the day, and the newer generations that are so digitally native, they're getting it from multiple inputs constantly. Personally, I really struggle to compete. And I can't just run a 3-day training program now and have you show up and sit there and absorb everything and exit gracefully. I have to be so much more creative. And the technology, I don't believe, is quite there yet, at least what I've been exposed to. So we're just testing and learning. We're trying so many different formats right now. We talk about a 360 approach to learning, so learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. It's no longer you bring in an instructor or an amazing keynote, transfer the knowledge, and off we go. How do we supplement it with technology? I think everyone's trying the bite-sized 10 minutes, the little nuggets of information. I worry about how much you're building skills with that versus just creating knowledge. So if anyone has the answer, I don't know if anyone else on the panel, I would just say we're just trying lots of different things right now and trying to meet people in a way that's most interesting. And the only other thing is trying to teach people how to learn. Teach the language of skills and enable people to make the space for learning.
Well,
Good.
every time. You and I both have the same things to say. I'm so sorry. I was going to say that you mentioned earlier driving their own development. How intrinsically motivated are people to want to learn what they need to learn? So if you put that path out there that one of you had described earlier and said, these are the skills you need to be able to achieve this, now you've got their attention. But it's more than just the knowledge. They have to get application of the knowledge, which creates the skills, and then the experience in using those skills. So if you don't look at it in the whole picture of just providing knowledge, then you're really missing out. So first, get their attention by making sure that you're identifying their own intrinsic motivation for doing what it is you need them to do.
Yeah, Nicki took the words out of my mouth. The first one is, I give 3 quick examples. One is all of the self-driven. It's tied to my career, I'm interested. We see really high engagement. There's not a lot of wiggle room or time to mess around because they want to develop the skill and want to be able to demonstrate what they've learned. The second one is this immersive technology that we've been using a couple years now in VR to be able to, well, we go through 3 steps through most programs, classroom or virtual learning, systems access through something we call ACEs, where they learn the keystrokes involved in their role, and then immersive in the role, which usually happens in a VR headset. That usually has pretty extreme, because you feel like you're gonna miss something in the moment. Now there's a small percentage of the population where that doesn't work, where somebody has vertigo and can't do it 3D, so we're going to a 2D web-based version today. And actually, I'm gonna make a bet on this, is for environments like our contact center environment, people still need to be immersed. It's a little bit difficult to have to get out the phones, go to another room and get in a headset. What if we continue to extrapolate the 2D version, not just for special health considerations, but for folks that are in very dynamic environments, and I can pause. If I'm struggling in X, I can go jump in the virtual environment, even if it's 2D in a web base, practice those skills, and then go back in. Because at the end of the day, the thing that we continually see, people want to be successful at what they do. But can you make it easy where it doesn't feel like a gotcha or I'm in trouble? Which brings me to the final one, which is we have an AI coaching model today that last year broke 1.1 million interactions, where employees went in and used the AI to be able to give them feedback on interactions that they wanted to be able to accomplish better. And so if I'm driven to go get feedback, now it's my manager, I'll extrapolate it from an employee's point of view. Now my manager's not telling me what I did wrong. Now I'm showing my manager how good I've become at my job, because I've used another tool to be able to give me feedback along the way.
Interesting.
I think it's not a bad thing at all, multitasking, more on a lighter side. I'm trying to get reverse mentoring from some of my young folks in the team on how to do it more effectively, how to multitask more effectively. It sometimes is helpful, so On a lighter note.
I love that.
It's not all bad. So.
It's not all bad. Well, we're going to have to wrap up today's session. I want to say thank you to the audience first I wish we could have gone to all of your questions. We're going to be up here a little bit. There's a little bit of time before the next session if you want to ask questions. I want to thank our panel. This was a great discussion. I mean, we could talk about this all day. Incredible insights. Hope you took away as much as I did. I learn every time I listen to experts like we have on stage this morning. Any final thoughts from the five before we wrap?
Not to take all the airtime, but I think one of the points that we should land on is probably that it's a pretty inspirational opportunity that we have to do some of these things. Right. I mean, when your senior leaders are asking you to implement like a VR thing, that's pretty cool. It's not just another lecture kind of style. So I think it's cool. I think people want to be engaged at work. They want to be committed. They want it to be exciting. The opposite would be pretty dull and terrible. So I think we should be happy about it. Yeah.
I'd just say don't be afraid to try something. Start small, prove it, have a story to tell, and continue to extrapolate it. A lot of the things that we do today, we started small. We proved it, and it gradually expanded across the company.
Love that.
Yeah, staying curious. Like the best data you can get is by just listening and asking people, and it's those small steps that often turn into something really big.
I think you need to identify the purpose of whatever you're doing. I think if you know the purpose, I'm sure you'll get there.
Nicki?
Absolutely asking, not saying why something can't be done, but saying what's possible. And from there, realizing that maybe you can't get that pie in the sky, but I can ask what's in my control.
Right.
And so from there, realizing we have the opportunity to influence people and business by the decisions we make, can we sell that idea so that other people can benefit from those ideas?
I'm going to close out by stealing a line from Brad when we were preparing. He said, we need to understand it's challenging, but we have to land on inspirational. And so with that, thank you this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you to the panel.